Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Tosfos Dibra Maschal Da'amrinon Kluta Kamisha Hun Chadamya. Let's begin. Da'amrinon Kluta Kamisha Hun Chadamya. Here in the Gemara, we asked, how can it be that Rabbah answers that our Mishnah follows the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who holds Kluta Kamisha Hun Chadamya? That indicates that Rabbah understood the machlekes between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanon was whether we hold of Kluta or not. The problem is that we know that Rabbi had a question how to learn the machlekes, the argument between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanon. Either they were arguing about Kluta, Rabbi Akiva holds of Kluta and the Rabbanon don't, or possibly they're arguing whether Yalfinan Zerik Mimaishit. However, regarding Kluta, they both agree. So it seems that there's a contradiction from the fact that he says that his opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that it's Kluta, seems to indicate that he knows that they were arguing about Kluta. At the same time, we know that Rabbi had a question of what they're arguing about. Tosfos is going to ask a question on this question of the Gemara. He's going to ask, what's the question based on? He's going to challenge the question, and then explain to us why the question is a good question, and that's why the Gemara had to answer that although originally he had a question how to learn the argument, ultimately he resolved that question and concluded that they're arguing about Kluta. Let's see the Tosfos inside. And this is difficult to the read. The my parach, what's he asking in the Gemara? Are you telling me that it was clear to Rabbah, but we know it wasn't clear? What's this question? From where does he know that it was clear to Rabbah? Why does it have to be that if he says that's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that means it was clear to Rabbah that they're arguing about Kluta? Why can't it be that it was that Rabbah says the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, although he's uncertain what they're arguing about? And Tosfos will show us how that's possible. So first he asks his question. His question is, it seems that these two things are compatible. They're not mutually exclusive. It could be, he says, it's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva and has a doubt of how to learn the argument. Tosfos now is going to respond to possible ways we would think to explain the question. If you're going to say it's because this that he said, it's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Says Tosfos, why does that contradict that he has a doubt how to learn the machlekes? He explains, this is because till Rabbi Akiva, because according to Rabbi Akiva, Islay he holds of no matter which way you look at it, he holds of Kluta. It could be the Rabbi was unsure how to learn the machlekes. Are they arguing about Kluta, or do they actually both agree with Kluta? The reason why I said it's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva is because either way it'll fit with Rabbi Akiva. But he's not saying that they're arguing about Kluta. It could be they both agree with Kluta, but since it's possible that only Rabbi Akiva holds of Kluta, so he's saying it's certainly the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, possibly also the Rabbanon, but certainly Rabbi Akiva. So from there we don't have a proof that the fact that he said it's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva means he was clear that they're arguing about Kluta. Could be he was unclear. But he said it's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva because either way we look at the machlekes, Rabbi Akiva certainly holds of Kluta. But according to the Rabbanon, Misafkali has a question if they hold of Kluta or not. Therefore he just said it's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And that's why he was unable to say Hamani Rabbanani. Who is this opinion? Who is the author of our Mishnah? The Rabbanon. He couldn't have said that because he's not sure. Do the Rabbanon hold of Kluta or do they not? It's only Rabbi Akiva who certainly will hold of Kluta that he can say for sure our Mishnah we can say is authored by him. And if we were to say this that it says earlier, Rabbi Akiva Sarah Kluta Kamisha Hunchadamya, Rabbanon Chulu, that Rabbi Akiva holds of Kluta and the Rabbanon don't. If we were to say those are the words, those are part of the words of Rabbah. In other words, Rabbah said it's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Then the Gemara continues and presents the machlekes between Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanon and explains Rabbi Akiva holds of Kluta and the Rabbanon don't. If we were to say that interpretation are the words of Rabbah, Hakol Medivrei Rabbi, all of that was the words of Rabbah. Hava Asi Shapir would go, well, oh, Rabbah says they're arguing about Kluta, but we know he had a doubt. And then we have a question. But says Tosfos, that's not the case. It doesn't seem that those are the words of Rabbah. It seems that the words of Rabbah were Hamani Rabbi Akiva. This is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And the Gemara then presents where Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanon argue and how to learn it in such a way that it'll fit with Rabbi Akiva. But that's not the words of Rabbah himself. And therefore we have a question. What is the Gemara asking? Are you telling me it was obvious to Rabbah that they argue about Kluta, but we know he had a question what they're arguing about? Where do we have an indication that it was obvious to him? All he said is that it's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And the explanation is, although he had a doubt how to learn the machlekes, nevertheless, either way, Rabbi Akiva will certainly hold of Kluta, and therefore he's able to say it's the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. So Tosfos now will present two answers by the Ri. And Ri says, the Hachi Pirushi, this is the explanation of the Gemara's question. But Rabbah had a question how to interpret the machlekes. The cave and the equal is being that there is place to have doubt about what Rabbi Akiva and the Rabbanan are arguing about. We could also have a doubt that Dilma Kula Alma, maybe according to everybody, maybe nobody holds of Kluta. Rabbanan and Rabbi Akiva, Uvezu Keneged Zu, and therefore if the Rishus Hayachids, are on opposite sides of the street, Kula Alma Pater, everybody agrees that it's Pater, since there's no Moshe on two sides of the street, and there's no Kluta, so there's no place for a Chiyuv. Keep Ligi, when are they arguing? B'dyuta Achas, when it's on the same side of the Rishus Rabbim, not across from one another, but on the same side, aligned in a row. The Rabbi Kiva survey Alfin and Zerik Moshe. Rabbi Kiva says Chayiv because he holds we learn Zerik from Moshe. Just like Moshe does Chayiv on the same side of the Rishus Rabbim, so to Zerik, the Rabbanan Sarvi and the Rabbanan hold Lo Alfina. We do not learn Zerik from Moshe. Moshe does Chayiv in such a manner. Zerik is not. So if that's the case, let's see first the answer. So the answer is that since if Rabbi had a question how to learn it, one of the ways of learning it is that Rabbi Kiva holds of Kluta. Another way is they both hold of Kluta. But then there's a third way that neither of them holds of Kluta. And therefore, when Rabbi goes and tells us that it's the opinion of Rabbi Kiva that holds of Kluta, that contradicts the fact that he had a doubt whether maybe Rabbi Kiva does not hold of Kluta. But here one can ask a question, which Tosfos will just answer without actually bringing up the question. That's why it'll be in purple. If that was one of the ways of learning it, why wasn't it presented by Rabbi? Says Tosfos, Rabbi didn't concern himself to explain all the possible ways of learning it. He was just saying there's a doubt how to learn it. And he provided us with two examples. But there are other ones as well. So in other words, Rabbi said, here there's a machlekes between Rabbi Kiva and the Rabbanan. I'm not sure what the basis of the machlekes is. There are many ways to learn it. Let me just point out two of them. But there are additional ones as well. And one of them is that Rabbi Kiva will not hold of Kluta. And therefore it ends up that it is a contradiction. And that's why the Gemara has a question. How can Rabbi say it's the opinion of Rabbi Kiva, but he had a question? What they're arguing about, and in one of the possible interpretations, Rabbi Kiva will not hold of Kluta. Now let's move on to the second answer of the Ri. And furthermore, Ri says, the Hadaka Amar Hashas, that the Gemara says, Avalamata Masara, Divra Kol Chayev. In the second way of learning the machlekes, we said they're arguing above 10 tefachim. Rabbi Kiva says chayev because yalfinon zerik mimoshit. The Rabbanan say pater because lo yalfinon zerik mimoshit. But if the person threw it lower than 10 tefachim, everybody holds of that is chayev. Why? Because we say kluta kamisha huncha. And therefore the person's chayiv, because since it went within 10 tefachim, which is Rishus Rabbim, and we say kluta kamisha huncha, so being that the object rested in Rishus Rabbim, the person did the malacha veitzah and he's chayiv. Says Tosfos, Hainu l'Rabbanon. This is to the Rabbanon. When the Gemara says, but lower than 10 tefachim, everybody says chayiv. That's everybody. Rabbi Kiva and the Rabbanon. But the reason that it's chayiv, that we provide that because we hold of kluta, that's only for the Rabbanon. Of the Rabbi Kiva, but according to Rabbi Kiva, lav kemishon chadamya. It's not kluta kemishon chadamya. We don't hold of kluta. Umechayev, and why is it chayev? Mishum di alfin and zerik mi meishit, because we learn zerik from meishit. In other words, let's first present the answer, see how it relates to our question, and then we'll go to the next part of Tosfos, which will further explain this idea. Tosfos is basically telling us here that when Rabbi presented two possible ways of understanding the machlekes between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Akiva, in the first way, Rabbi Kiva holds of Kluta and the Rabbanan don't. In the second way, the Rabbanan hold of Kluta and Rabbi Kiva doesn't. And therefore, if Rabbi says it's the opinion of Rabbi Kiva, that contradicts the fact that he had a doubt whether Rabbi Kiva held of Kluta. And how we're going to learn when it says that lower than 10 Tvachim, everybody says Chayiv because of Kluta, we learn it as follows. Lower than 10 Tvachim, everybody says Chayiv. Rabbi Kiva, because he holds, we learn Zarek from Moshe, just like above 10 Tvachim. When we say because of Kluta, that's the reason that the Rabbanan will hold Chayiv. So everybody holds Chayiv, but for different reasons. The reason of Rabbi Kiva we already know. All we need to provide is the reason of the Rabbanan. So we say because they hold of Kluta. Now Tosfos is going to prove this logically, that it must be the Rabbi Kiva, when he says Chayiv within 10 Tvachim, it's not because of Kluta, but rather it's because Yalfinan Zerik Mimoshit. Let's see. The Isaver Kamishon Chodamya, that's why it's in light blue, because it's a proof. Because if he holds Kluta Kamishon Chodamya, they have a Matzil Lamelav Zerik Mimoshit. He wouldn't be able to learn Zerik from Meshit. In other words, Tosfos is telling us here that learning Zerik from Meshit and holding of Kluta are not compatible. It's one or the other. They're mutually exclusive. So once we know that Rabbi Kiva holds Yalfin and Zerik Meshit, he can no longer hold of Kluta. Let's see the proof. The Holedamya Klal. If you hold of Kluta, you can't anymore learn Zerik from Meshit, because once Kluta is in effect, Zerik is not similar to Meshit whatsoever. Why not? The cave in the Kamishon Chadamya, because if you're holding Kluta, you say Kamishon Chadamya. It's like it's resting. Have a zerik l'mayla masar. So when somebody throws an object above 10 tefachim, it's kezerik m'rishus hayachid l'makim p'tur. It's if he threw it from rishus hayachid and then it went through the makim p'tur. It's above 10 tefachim. It's like it rested in the makim p'tur. Umi makim p'tur l'rishus hayachid, and then it went from the makim p'tur to the rishus hayachid. It's not at all similar to Meishit, which is a direct passing from one Rishus HaYachid to another Rishus HaYachid. Rishus HaRabim be'emtza, the Rishus HaRabim is just in between, but it doesn't actually stop in the Rishus HaRabim. So we see that it must be Kavan de Savar, Yalfinan Zerik Meishit. Since he holds, we do learn Zerik from Meishit. Savar Kluta Lav Kamishon Chodamia. He holds that Kluta is Lav Kamishon Chodamia. Let's explain that for a moment. In other words, Yalfinan Zerik Meishit tells us that just like Meishit is from one Rishus HaYachid to another, but just passing through the middle area, so to Zerik is the same thing. It went from one Rishus HaYachid to another, and it just passed through the middle area. But Kluta Kamishon Chodamia causes Zerik to be very different than Meishit. So Kluta then tells us, Kluta makes it that it didn't go from one Rishus HaYachid to another and just pass through the middle Rishus. It actually stopped in the middle Rishus. So therefore, they're mutually exclusive. If we say we learn Zerik from Meishit, we're saying that Zerik did not stop in the middle Rishus. That means we don't hold of Kluta. And if we do hold of Kluta that it did stop in the middle Rishus, then you wouldn't learn Zerik from Meishit, because Meishit didn't stop and Zerik didn't. So from here we see that if we say that they're arguing above 10 Tfachim, now Rabbi Kiva holds we learn Zerik from Meishit. When the Rabbanan say we don't, then when we say that below within 10 Tfachim, they both agree that it's Chayev because of Kluta, it means to say they both agree it's Chayev, and the Rabbanan's reason to say Chayev is because of Kluta. Rabbi Kiva's reason is because he learned Zerik from Meishit. And now we can understand the question of the Gemara. The Gemara asks, Rabbah said it's the opinion of Rabbi Kiva that holds of Kluta. That contradicts the fact that he had a question how to learn the argument. And one of the ways Rabbi Kiva does not hold of Kluta. Now we're going to move on to a side discussion. We just now finished bringing a proof to this second answer based on logic. Tosfos is going to move on later to bring another proof, not by logic, from a source in the Gemara later on. However, now we're going to move to a side discussion for a moment. We just introduced a logic-based concept that learning Zerik from Meishit and Kluta are not compatible. Tosfos is going to say that this idea resolves a question that we asked in an earlier Tosfos. Let's see it. So this is a side point. Now it also makes sense the we couldn't say earlier on of that above 10 Tvachim everybody holds Chayev, Delphin and Zerik in Meishit, because we learn Zerik from Meishit. In the first way of learning the Machlekes, we said they argue within 10 Tvachim. Rabbi Kiva holds Chayev because he holds of Kluta. Rabbanan hold Pater because they don't hold of Kluta. And then we concluded, but above 10 Tvachim, everybody says that it's Pater because we don't learn Zerik from Meishit. We asked earlier, why don't we say, but above 10 Tvachim, everybody says Chayev because we do learn Zerik from Meishit. Says Tosfos, now we can't have that question anymore because we just said that Kluta is not compatible with learning Zerik from Meishit. So if Rabbi Kiva says Chayev within 10 Tfachim because he holds of Kluta, we can't say they both hold Chayev above 10 Tfachim because we learn Zerik from Meishit. Once an opinion holds of Kluta, it cannot hold that we learn Zerik from Meishit. To Rabbi Kiva because Rabbi Kiva is unable to learn Zerik from Meishit. Kavan the Savar because he holds Kimishon Chodamir because it's if it's resting, and if the object came to rest by Zerik, it's not similar to Meishit where it never came to rest. So that question has now been answered more directly, comparing to the answers that Tosfos gave earlier. He asked this question earlier and gave the answers over there. This answer basically just removes the whole question and says it's not possible to say they both hold of learning Zerik from Meishit, because once Rabbi Kiva holds of Kluta, he can no longer hold we learn Zerik from Meishit. Now Tosfos moves back to the second answer of the Ri, that according to the second way of Rabba's question, when we say that within 10 Tvachim, they both say Chayev because of Kluta, it's not that Rabbi Kiva says because of Kluta. Rabbi Kiva says because we learn Zerik from Meishit. It's just that the Rabbanon hold of Kluta. Tosfos now is going to try to prove that from a Gemara. This also seems a little bit to be the case from a Gemara later. The Harav Chizda boy nami bahazerik k'mei Rabba dahacha. Rabbi Chizda later on in Perek Hazerik asks the same exact question that Rabba asks over here. He asks how to learn the machlekes between Rabbi Kiva and the Rabbanan, and he presents the two possibilities that we mentioned here. So if this that we concluded, that within 10 Tvachim everybody says Chayev because of Kluta, if we're going to say that the reason of Kluta, Ka'inami at Rabbi Kiva also refers to Rabbi Kiva, so within 10 Tvachim everybody says Chayev. And both of them for the reason of Kluta, if that's how we're going to learn it, Heichi Matzi L'Meimer L'Rav Chizda, How could we say, according to Rav Chisda, the L'Kula Alma K'Misha Unchadamya? That's a problem for Rav Chisda to say, I have a question that maybe everybody holds of Kluta. That's not possible. Rav Chisda would never ask that I'm not sure how to learn it and say one of the possible ways is that within 10 Tfachim everybody holds its Chayiv, and both of them for the same reason, and that is because Kluta K'Misha Unchadamya. Why not? Well, a common bepirkin, because later on in our perek mashma it seems that dafke b'rishas hayachid leibai Rav Chisda hanacha, specifically in Rishas hayachid, Rav Chisda does not make it necessary to have a hanacha agabi mokem rabba on an area that's 4x4. Rav Chisda later on says that in Rishas hayachid it's not necessary to have a hanacha on an area that's 4x4. It doesn't have to be daled al daled. Now, if one holds of kluta, the idea of kluta is that it's not necessary to have hanacha on a place that's 4x4 anywhere, because kluta kamisha unchadanya, even though it's not an area that's 4x4. So kluta means it's never necessary to have hanacha al mokim daled al daled. So how would Rav Chisda be able to say that it's possible that both Rabbanan and the Rabbi Kiva, the Tanaim of this machlekes, hold that we don't need hanacha on an area that's 4x4 anywhere? So then how could he then go ahead and say it's only Rishas Hayachid that you don't need daled al daled, but in Rishas Rabim you do? Which opinion is he basing his opinion on? He's an Amayr and they're Tanaim. How would he be able to argue with them? So therefore it seems that it must be that even in that interpretation, that within 10 Tfachim everybody says Chayiv, and we conclude because of Kluta is only the Rabbanan. Rabbi Kiva do not hold of Kluta, does not hold of Kluta. So it comes out in the first way of presenting the Machlekes, Rabbi Kiva holds of Kluta, the Rabbanan don't. So Rav Chisda could rely on the Rabbanan. In the second way, the Rabbanan hold of Kluta and the Rabbi Kiva doesn't, so he could rely on Rabbi Kiva. However, says Tosfos Umiyu, he qualifies this proof and says it's not such a complete proof. Umiyu Rashba Birish, the Rashba explains with Samach nearby in the opinion of Rav Chisda that Af Birish Sarabim, that even in Birish Sarabim, like Bayi Rav Chisda Mokim Dalet, Rav Chisda doesn't make it necessary to have Dalet al Dalet. So therefore, according to the Rashba's way of learning it, the Rav Chisda says we don't need Anach on an area that's 4x4, Rishas Yachid and Rishas Sarabim. So then he could hold that everybody agrees with Klota. And therefore, everybody holds you don't need daled daled anywhere, because that's the same opinion that he has, that it's not necessary to have hanacha on an area that's 4x4 anywhere, not in Rishas Yachid and not in Rishas Rabim. So to briefly summarize, we asked, what's the indication? Why, if Rabbah says it's the opinion of Rabbi Kiva, does that contradict that he had a question how to learn the machlekes? And the answer was two answers. The first answer is because there's another way of learning the machlekes. Rabbi Kiva does not hold of klota. And the second answer is that the second way that we presented, when we said within 10 Tvachim, everybody says chayiv, because Kluta Kamisha Unchadamya, that was only the reason part, because of Kluta Kamisha Unchadamya referred only to the Rabbanon. Everybody says chayiv was referring to both. So we say everybody says chayiv is both Rabbanon and Rabbi Kiva, because of Kluta is explanation for the Rabbanon. But Rabbi Kiva does not hold of Kluta. He says it's because we learned Zerg from Meshit, and therefore if Rabbah says that Rabbi Kiva holds Kluta, it contradicts that he had a question, and in one of the ways, Rabbi Kiva does not hold of Kluta. Then we brought two proofs for the second understanding, that Rabbi Kiva does not hold of Kluta in the second way that we learned the Machlekes. One was a logic-based proof, which then explained a different question that we had earlier, and we also brought a proof based on a later Gemara, which we said is not so complete, since there's an alternative way of learning that Gemara, which then the proof is not a proof anymore.